Hopefully we learned something here. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a rambling video. There was an article yesterday that dropped. We talked a little bit about it on stream, but I wanted to drop a video on this. And I think maybe there's a few things that we can learn from this. Jake Fisher's article talked about CJ McCollum and Portland's plans. And it's what we've been saying for a while. Now, me and Eric's opinions on the trade deadline and on what Portland is doing isn't really based on anything we're hearing. It's just based on common sense and logic, okay? Eric has studied the CBA, I've studied the CBA, and we've really focused on roster construction. We're just fans with a YouTube channel, but for fans with a YouTube channel, I'd say we're pretty well versed in that. So let's just jump straight into the article. Here are the important quotes from it. This quote is talking about the deal between the Blazers and the Pelicans. Quote, at the time, that deal was commonly regarded around the NBA as a value deal for the Pelicans. Now, let's jump into the narrative that CJ McCollum was a negative value, which has just been tossed around by people for some reason, even though it's not based on any sort of fact. And me and Eric have sat here and tried to dispel that notion and tried to explain that no, a dude who as a lead guard will get 24, 25 points per game efficiently and get 5 assists and is a good locker room guy and is a leader, that dude is worth a max contract. If you're watching this video and you disagree with me, please go and find a player with that production level that has not been paid a max contract. Okay, it's hard to find a player that gets 20 points per game plus that's not on a max contract unless they're on their rookie deal, okay? Let alone the production that CJ McCollum gives as the lead guard, which the Pelicans were trading for CJ McCollum to be the lead guard. They weren't trading for him to be the second guard, which he was in Portland next to Damian Lillard. They were trading for the player that tore things up when Damian Lillard missed games, tore things up as a lead guard. And CJ McCollum has gone there to New Orleans, and they have a legitimate chance at winning in the first round after starting 3-16 on the season. David Griffin had his job saved by CJ McCollum. That trade saved David Griffin his job. That trade potentially keeps the Pelicans in New Orleans. Their fan base was, New Orleans doesn't really care about basketball, but CJ McCollum has gone there, become the face of the franchise, reinvigorated the fan base, right at a time when there was rumors and whispers that the Pelicans might leave New Orleans. So CJ McCollum might not have only saved David Griffin his job, he might have kept the Pelicans in New Orleans, okay? I don't know. That might not be the case, but it's possible, given the whispers, and then CJ McCollum comes here. They have a realistic chance of the Western Conference Finals. Now, I still think the Suns take care of business in this first round series. Game 3's later tonight, but that trade, getting him and Larry Nance Jr., who's been playing really well, has paid dividends, which is what Jake Fisher says in this article. So I ask you, go ask New Orleans fans if CJ McCollum's a negative value, a negative contract. He's absolutely not. And GMs, according to this article, didn't think so either. Okay? I don't care what Joe Schmo thinks of CJ McCollum's contract, right? Whatever fan or media member with a platform, if they say he's a negative contract, that doesn't mean he's a negative contract, okay? Just because somebody has a platform does not mean they are well-versed in this type of thing, and it does not mean that they are educated, okay? It means that they know how to talk, and they know how to capture the attention of some listeners, but it does not mean that they know what they're talking about. They might, but they might not. Being super educated on this sort of thing is just not a prerequisite to building a platform or having a platform to talk about this sort of thing. Because we heard time and time and time again that CJ McCollum was a negative value. Okay? I'm going to believe Jake Fisher, who has sources, who talks to GMs over somebody that says they have sources and says they have insider information but never actually discloses said insider information and just tells you to believe them and to trust them because they know what they're talking about, so you should listen to them. But then somebody who actually has information comes out and basically says what they're saying about CJ McCollum being a negative contract is absolute BS. And it's not like this is the first time this type of thing has happened before. Now let's jump into the quote about Portland's nightmare outcome. This is going to be good. The article says, the Blazers seem to prioritize salary flexibility in much of their trade deadline conversations rather than leverage a greater amount of draft capital. But there must have been wiggle room for Portland to swipe more than one first-rounder from the pick-loaded Pelicans for McCollum and Nance, the latter of whom the Blazers acquired from the Chicago Bulls last summer for a lottery-protected first. So we traded a first for Nance and only got back a first for CJ and Nance. It's like we essentially traded CJ McCollum straight up for Josh Hart. I like Josh Hart, but he's not CJ McCollum. And honestly, our pick is probably worse. I would rather have all our future firsts to be able to trade this offseason than not being able to trade any of them because they're backing up a protection owed to Chicago, and then all we have is a 2025 Milwaukee first. Okay, so we basically traded CJ and better draft pick tradability and flexibility for Josh Hart and a 2025 Milwaukee first, which is probably going to be a late first and probably doesn't have much value. That was the route. Now, I know that Neil Olshey made the initial Larry Nance Jr. trade, but it's just funny how our assets have dwindled in the past year. The article goes on to say that we lost the New Orleans pick when they made the playoffs, and then it says, the Pelicans still don't get to keep the selection. They never really expected to. It will head to Charlotte thanks to a 3-team sign and trade with Memphis that delivered Devontae Graham to New Orleans among a host of other moving parts. But the Trailblazers had been banking on the Pelicans to deliver them a late lottery selection before the play-in tournament started. Through conversations with NBA personnel, it was clear that Portland staffers were working under the assumption that they would have 2 lottery picks at their disposal. The Blazers' interest in trading at least one of those picks to acquire Detroit Pistons forward Jeremy Grant has been one of the worst-kept secrets in NBA circles. A Western Conference official said, quote, that was a big deal to them. The expectation was certainly, once we get this pick, we'll turn it into someone, we'll overpay to get someone. So basically, Cronin just assumed that the Pelicans weren't going to make the playoffs. I assume that's why he didn't try to back it up with the Lakers pick. He just assumed that the Lakers would make the playoffs or something. And guess who was trying to tell you that a couple months ago? Eric was on record multiple times saying that he thought that Joe Cronin just assumed that they were going to get the pick and didn't need to back it up with a Lakers pick, and the Lakers were going to make a run and go to the playoffs. And this article makes it sound like that's probably correct because it's saying that Portland just assumed they were going to get the pick. Joe Cronin should have mitigated his risk, and even though it looked like the Pelicans weren't going to make the playoffs, he should have asked for the Lakers pick as backup protection in case it conveyed. In New Orleans' situation, with what was looked at as a value deal that saved David Griffin's job, I don't think there was any way that they were going to look at that and not provide the Lakers pick as a backup protection, because New Orleans didn't even get the Lakers pick unless it was top 10. So even if the Lakers didn't make the playoffs, if they got close, it wasn't even going to convey to New Orleans, so it wouldn't have conveyed to Portland as backup protection. But there should have been some sort of wording in there for Portland that if the Lakers pick was maybe 5 to 10, New Orleans can have it if it's in the top 4. But if it was 5 to 10, Portland would get it if the Pelicans pick didn't convey. So the Pelicans trade got better for them because it worked out for them and they made the playoffs, which Eric has challenged people time and time again to think of a deal in which if the trade worked out, they also had to give up less in the trade. The fact that Cronin couldn't sit there and say, if you guys make the playoffs and we don't get your pick, if you have the Lakers pick between 5 and 10, we want that as a backup, was just an absolutely negotiating nightmare. And it sounds like it's just bred out of pure incompetence that they just assumed that they were going to get the Pelicans pick. That's what we were saying for a while, and that's what this article implies. The second part of that quote about just being willing to overpay to get someone, I mean, we got teams to underpay for our assets, and other GMs pretty much confirmed that, saying that it was a good value deal for the Pelicans, and Cronin even confirmed that himself at the trade deadline, saying that they probably could have gotten more. Even though we had teams underpay for what we had, we're going to overpay to get someone else. That's terrible logic and terrible thinking. Meanwhile, in the days leading up to the CJ McCollum trade, it was reported that New York was interested, Cleveland was interested, Atlanta was interested, among other teams, in CJ McCollum. The whole narrative that Joe Cronin had no leverage with the Pelicans is complete BS. When the dude sits there and says that they probably could have gotten more value elsewhere, and personnel across the league thought that New Orleans got good value on the trade that Cronin ended up making with New Orleans, which also means that they don't think CJ McCollum is a negative asset at all, and we've seen him be a very, very, very positive asset for New Orleans. The whole notion of Cronin having no leverage in trade talks with the Pelicans is complete BS. I've legitimately seen people just sit here and say that they had to duck the luxury tax, so he had no leverage with New Orleans, despite the fact that the Blazers already ducked the luxury tax before that with the Los Angeles Clippers trade, where they sent out Robert Covington and Norman Powell. They were already under the luxury tax. So in the end, here's what I think the situation is. I think it's emotionally based narratives that people are chasing and want to come true. People hated Neil Olshey. That's obvious. I didn't like Neil Olshey due to the stuff that came out with how he treated his workforce, and I don't think he was the best GM in terms of making roster moves either. But you had a lot of people that legitimately despise that man, okay? He got fired. You have a new guy that's brought in who's a nice guy. And I think people want Joe Cronin to succeed so bad that they will not logically analyze his moves or think about his moves. And part of this is based on their own preconceived notions, such as CJ McCollum being a negative contract or CJ McCollum not having trade value or yada, yada, yada. And it becomes a narrative-based evaluation process when it comes to evaluating this trade deadline for the Portland Trail Blazers. I mean, imagine if Neil Olshey was still here and this was his trade deadline. All the people that thought CJ McCollum was a negative contract but thought Olshey should trade him for a star would have absolutely blasted Olshey for this trade deadline. You would not be sitting here hearing that Olshey did a good job creating cap space and cap flexibility and all this stuff. There is no doubt in my mind about that. People want to make any excuse they can make for Joe Cronin, and it doesn't matter if they're pitching absolute BS. They will pretend like it's absolute fact, and they will even sit there and argue that you're an idiot if you don't agree with them. And then you have people that sit there doing that crap say that this side of YouTube is not the side you want to be on. It's an absolute charade, man. It's an absolute charade. And I will continue to hold this stuff accountable. I will continue to be outspoken about this stuff. And it's not due to a difference in opinion. If you sat here and tried to argue that CJ McCollum was a negative value because you didn't like this part of his game or that part of his game and that was your opinion, completely fine. Okay, if you sit here and act like it's an undisputable fact that he is a negative contract and act like people are morons if they don't agree with you, and then it's reported that no, the league does not view him as a negative contract, then I'm gonna call it out. Anyway, that wraps up this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you get where I'm coming from with my frustrations with just kind of the narrative from a lot of Blazer fans, man. I mean, I could see somebody watching this entire video through, and then at the end, it'll just be, well, you can't blame Cronin because Olshey left him with this mess. There are people out there that won't hold Cronin accountable. There are people out there that will excuse anything he does, won't criticize it. And in my opinion, it's because they really want him to succeed and they really did not like Neil Olshey. The thing is, I'm in the same boat. I want Cronin to succeed. I did not like Neil Olshey at the end of his tenure here in Portland, but I am not going to let it cloud my vision. Anyway, that wraps things up. We'll have a mock draft for you tomorrow. That should be fun. Hopefully you're able to catch that. If not, whenever I catch you next, hope life is good. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.